Something many people are not privy to, not adequately, is a prevalent psychological condition known as psychopathy. Let's take a look at the word psychopathy from an etymological point, meaning by looking at the root of the word. It is comprised of two Greek words, psyche, meaning the mind, and pathos, meaning sickness. This is where we get the word pathology from. So a sickness of the mind, basically a depression of the mind. And this is mostly why I do not use the euphemized version of the word, which is sociopathy, because it mostly de-emphasizes the psyche aspect of it. So psychopathy is a form of brain damage, which we'll talk about in a minute. And many people, through their personal experiences, are aware that there are people who have this psychological condition. And we should look at the scale of it as per its influence on society. So let's go through all of the characteristics of a psychopath. So first and foremost, the absence of empathy, as many people have already come to know. These are people with no regard for the feelings of other beings. They cannot empathize with others. They don't feel bad after conducting wrongful behavior unto another. Another one is callousness, so the absence of the exercise of conscience. They do the wrong over the right if it means more for them, without sympathy or feeling for other people. Psychological denial, which is also known as narcissism. They deny that they are to blame for anything. They are always right and can never be wrong. Justification. They always try to justify their wrongful behaviors. They try to convince you that what they've done is necessary. They also continuously blame someone else, because they themselves don't take responsibility for their wrongful behaviors. Another one is contempt. So they have contempt for people in the sense that they look at themselves as being higher than someone else. So I am here and you are here is their mentality. Pathological lying, also not a strange one, meaning they lie incessantly. They have no consideration for the consequences of their actions. So they just do as they please, even if it harms another. So they don't think, will this action result in harm unto another? Not relevant, just do it. They are willing to take what they want and do as they please, regardless of whom is hurt and whom is wronged. Theft is not a problem for them. They'll take your right to remain safe, your right to remain unharmed, your right not to be stolen from. They'll take your property. They are takers, and they are willing to use intimidation and violence to do so. So they basically are willing to do everything at other people's expense. So if they want to get a certain result in life, or if they want to acquire something, and if they need to step over someone else to be able to do so, so be it. Which inevitably brings us to social Darwinism, meaning self-preservation, basically a survival of the fittest mentality. People who erroneously believe that survival is the sole purpose of everything, even if it means having no regard for other beings. That things like empathy are frivolous if it compromises your chances of survival. The strongest and most vicious always survive, is their mentality, which we'll talk more about in the future. Delusions of grandeur. They have a very lofty view of themselves, so severe egotism. Cunning thinking. You can also recognize a psychopath by their sharp, cunning intellect. And note that I'm putting emphasis on intellect, because there is a distinction between intellect and intelligence. They have the ability to feign the normal human emotion. They emulate other people feeling emotions. So they often sell themselves as a philanthropist in lieu of the parasite they really are. Or they often present themselves as a source of safety for others, instead of the threat they themselves pose to others. And for as long as people believe them, they will continue to impose on everyone else. There are two forms of psychopathy, if you will. There is primary psychopathy, which is the least prominent, and then there is secondary psychopathy. A secondary psychopath is someone who has become conscienceless throughout their life. They have basically, in some cases, because of certain experiences they've had in life, said, I'm cutting out my conscience, or I am not exercising conscience anymore, because it doesn't serve me, it only thwarts me. So you have the physiological mechanism to experience emotion, but it has been numbed out through trauma, abuse, mental conditioning, and a poisoned worldview of reality mostly. So oftentimes this is a mentality whereby people say, I haven't experienced this, therefore I don't want you to experience it also. Or I've been abused, therefore I shall abuse you. A primary psychopath has acquired this condition from birth, so they are born this way. And this could either be the result of physical trauma, a developmental problem, if you will, and we could look at some other speculations of how this might have occurred in the future. So physiologically speaking, either way, the limbic system of the brain, which is responsible for feeling bad after a wrongdoing has been conducted, isn't functioning the way it should. So again, this can be described as a form of brain damage. These are psychologically damaged people. So these characteristics that we've described are basically the same as animalistic behaviors of animals. And there is indeed an animal nature that dwells within us, but that doesn't mean that we should let it rule. Because this is what ultimately differentiates us from animals. Our ability to use discernment, to think before an action is taken. Does an action result in harm unto another? So it behooves me to say that people shouldn't confuse this condition with our nature. And we will talk more about human nature and human nurture in the future to show where the problem really lies. Looking at this on a wider scale, it has been acknowledged that about 5% of the world population has this psychological condition. But I'd say it's a very conservative estimate in a sense that it could be far greater than that. And about 1% of the world population has acquired it from birth. But I'd say it's a lot less because once again it doesn't occur that often. But still, people with this psychological condition can be found anywhere in society, especially places which suit their characteristics. Another trait of psychopaths is they continue to re-emphasize fear and dependency, because they know what they can get out of someone else whom is in a state of fear. They know that there will be confusion as a result of people in fear, because people aren't operating from here, they're operating from here, mostly responsive behaviors. They can't think clearly and pragmatically anymore. They can't fathom what is going on. They can't make sense of a situation. And so they choose to take something at face value by someone whom they have put on a pedestal. And also with all of the division between people nowadays, because people aren't socially connected with each other anymore. People are pretty much isolated from each other nowadays. So they know that people will ultimately look elsewhere for a solution when a threat is proposed, which they will then present because people identify them as their leaders. And so they know that people will ultimately accept it and acquiesce, because most people today are so mentally conditioned that they will never hesitate about what's being said to them by their quote-unquote leaders. But when all of a sudden, when some people are not operating from here, but are operating from here, so are taking a step back and seeing the situation for what it is, and not from the perception that is given to them, that is presented to them to believe. Because most people today are looking at the world as it is described by vested media. So the news, for instance, is in essence giving you a perception. It is describing an event that is taking place, and it wants you to look at that event in the exact same way as they describe it. So the news will tell you that the world is full of threats and vile instances, and is describing an event in a way that is in their favor, and that the only way to protect yourself from it is the solution they eventually present to you at the end. And people are indeed looking at the world as it is described by vested media. They are imagining this narrative, and that is why they become afraid. But as soon as people start recognizing that what is being said there on television isn't corresponding to reality, so they realize that their description of the situation is not in line with what is really going on, and as a result become suspicious of those who pose as the solution to all those so-called threats, meaning you become suspicious of authority. I mean, you can be suspicious of anything. You can be suspicious of all the people in the world. You can be suspicious of nature, which sustains your life, believe it or not. But as soon as people become suspicious of those that are not to be questioned, of those special people, it has become taboo. And that is how far mental conditioning has gone, because of comfort. Many people today become so anxious about even thinking about stepping outside of their comfort zone, because since birth people are so afraid of deviating from the determined norm, because people who do are not accepted. So conforming with everyone else, thinking as the majority thinks, behaving in the way that the majority behaves, following the herd, because it is ultimately much easier to just take a perception that is given to you at face value by someone whom you and other people put on a pedestal, and it is ultimately much easier to just concur with the majority. They need people to accept reality as their vision of it dictates. They need people to share their poisoned worldview of reality, with people also saying, well, can't do anything about it, can you? Which is apathy. People don't care, and it's time that they do. So people often try to attribute their moral sensibilities onto someone else. Meaning people often say, well, why would someone do that? Why would someone want that? Well, just because you wouldn't do it doesn't mean someone else wouldn't do it either. And so people could not grasp the fact that some could be so malicious in our society. And this has been afflicting us since time immemorial. Our entire history is filled with malefied of conscienceless rulers and psychopathic power seekers, and has caused an immense amount of suffering at an unprecedented scale. It is only for some reason that people started believing that after experiencing this for millennia and millennia now, that after the turn of the 70s, let's say, that authority, quote unquote, has turned itself 180 degrees, and now it loves you and cares wholeheartedly about you and your safety, and would never do anything at your expense. Now, let me ask you this. Do you really think that? That they, for the first time in history, care about people? We see these traits regularly within many positions of so-called authority in our society, because of their inclination towards control and power over others, which inevitably gives them the propensity to get to the highest positions of these hierarchies, which is irrevocable. For instance, if you were to remove these people from these positions, they will always make their way back, like the effect of a magnet. And soon we'll look at where the problem really lies. People, in fact, need to become more responsible. And what is responsibility? It once again is in the word itself. Your responsibility, your ability to respond for yourself. People need to become more responsible for what they take at face value, especially when it comes from up above these positions. Once again, even if it seems sincere. Only then will people become free of the duress and coercion of these people. And will people not be forced to live their lives according to how they want you to live it? Will you not have these people take what is rightfully yours, what you have rightfully acquired? And will all their violent means to those ends cease to exist?